Hey guys, tonight we're going way back. No electricity, no microwaves, and absolutely no drive-through. You're standing barefoot in a muddy medieval market square. The smell hits first wood smoke, wet wool, and something vaguely edible. You're starving. But don't worry, you're just in time for some of the most questionable snack options history ever coughed up. This is what passed for junk food before preservatives, before packaging, and before basic hygiene. And yes, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle into the shadow of a timbered stall where a woman in a muddy apron is hawking bone broth. But this isn't your trendy collagen-packed version. It's a pot of second-boiled bones, greyish and hollow, bobbing like driftwood in greasy water. A sprig of something green floats at the top, but don't get excited, it's more decorative than flavourful. She ladles you a bit into a wooden bowl. It's hot. It smells like wet leather. You sip it anyway. That's your appetizer. To your left, a lanky boy sells burnt bread ends. These are literal charred crusts cut from loaves baked too long or left too close to the fire. Kids snack on them like crackers, and if you squint, they almost resemble biscotti. Biscotti were made from barley husks and desperation. You nibble one. It tastes like smoke and dust, but it's crunchy, which is something. In medieval towns, the idea of a snack was pretty loose. Anything that didn't require sitting down or formal tableware could count. Street food existed, but it was gritty, often literally. Market stalls used unwashed hands, reused cloths, and shared everything: tools, bowls, food. If a bit of hay ended up in your pie, that's just texture. You wander on. A man in a wide hat is selling black pudding fingers. These sausage-like strips are made from pig's blood, oats and fat, fried until rubbery and served cold. The taste? Metallic, savoury, and oddly satisfying if you don't think too hard. Rich people have the luxury of squeamishness. You, however, are hungry. You grab two. Historians still argue whether commoners developed a taste for these blood-rich, offal-heavy treats, or simply ate them because they had no other choice. It's the eternal medieval mystery. Delicacy or survival mechanism. You lean against a timber post and chew. Around you, chickens strut, a child coughs wetly, and a cartwheel creaks. This is food without calories labelled, carbs counted, or allergens marked. It's visceral, it's tactile, it's deeply sketchy. A loud sizzle draws your eye to a shallow brazier where something is frying. Flat cakes made of mashed peas and stale grain bubble in lard. The woman cooking them wears a burlap bonnet and has 3 teeth. She hands you one on a leaf. You bite in. It's mushy in the middle, crunchy on the outside, and salted with what may or may not be actual salt. Still, it's warm and oddly comforting, like deep-fried regret. There's a fringe detail not everyone knows. Sometimes they flavoured these cakes with crushed mustard seeds or garlic if they could find it. But most flavour came from the pan, and how many centuries of oil it had seen. One boy is selling apple cores. Not whole apples, just the cores, boiled with honey and skewered on sticks. They're chewy, sweet, and vaguely spicy. You ask what the spice is. He shrugs. Might be clove, might be beetle. Either way, it's not bad. These kinds of sweet-sour snacks were common among the poorer folks. They took bruised fruit, overripe or nearly fermented, and turned them into small edible treats. The line between snack and compost was a blurry one. Medieval frugality, after all, was less about virtue and more about staying alive. There's a curious cultural trend emerging even this early on. Food was either meant to be eaten instantly or preserved into oblivion. Very few things were in between. You either gnawed it straight off the grill, or it came buried in salt, vinegar, or smoke. A nearby stall is steaming. A giant pot of pottage-thick porridge-like slop made from whatever scraps were on hand. Peas, barley, some onion, maybe even a bit of salted pork. It's not a snack exactly, but plenty of people buy small wooden cups of it to go. The cook stirs constantly with a stick, so long it might double as a jousting lance. Pottage was basically the medieval version of leftovers in a blender. It changed daily, hourly. No two bowls were the same, but most tasted like warm oats, root vegetables, and faint despair. A quick note: some records say certain cooks added breadcrumbs to bulk it out, or even chalk dust to lighten the colour. Historians still argue whether that was culinary strategy or outright fraud. You sit down on a step to finish your cup. Nearby, someone is roasting marrow, bones cracking them open, and scraping the insides onto bits of coarse bread. You watch the fat drip onto the coals, the flames licking up eagerly. Someone hands you a piece. It's greasy, rich, and falls apart in your mouth. Your fingers shine with it. Marrow was considered poor man's butter, though the wealthy also adored it. It kept you full. It gave you energy. And in a world where meat was scarce, bones were gold. You wander off again, feeling heavier, both in stomach and in soul. That's enough snacking for now. You wander farther down the lane, past slouching cottages and wobbly carts, toward the sweet smells that beckon like a medieval siren song. Honey, spice, burnt flour. Someone's been baking, or at least attempting to. You follow your nose to a row of thatched stalls where dessert, in its earliest and strangest forms, awaits. The first treat that catches your eye is a honey cake. Don't be misled by the cozy name. This isn't fluffy. It's more like a dense, chewy brick that's been slapped together with ground nuts, flour, and as much honey as could be scrounged. It's gritty and sticky, but it clings to your teeth like a guilty secret. You bite in. It's sweet, almost shockingly sond. Then it fades into a dry chalkiness that leaves you coughing a little. You like it. Kind of. People in the Middle Ages didn't have refined sugar in abundance. Honey was the main sweetener for centuries, until cane sugar started making its expensive, exotic way into European kitchens. So any sweet treat that didn't taste like sadness owed its life to the bees. Right beside the honey cakes is something less appetizing. A hedgehog pie. Yes, really. No, it wasn't an everyday delicacy, but it existed. You lift the lid of a poorly covered tray to peek inside. The smell is complex, like overcooked stew and wet hay. These pies were usually made by rural families who trapped small animals out of sheer necessity. If you think that sounds horrific, remember, there was no Uber Eats, and hedgehogs were plentiful and slow. There's a fringe theory that these pies weren't always made with actual hedgehog meat. Some might have just used the name to imply rarity, or even to mask other, less identifiable ingredients. Pigeon? Rodent? Who's to say? Historians still argue whether the term hedgehog pie always referred to the creature, or if it just became a catch-all phrase for forest floor protein. Next up, roasted chestnuts. Now these you can get behind. Smoky, warm, and tucked into little cloth bundles. They're sold in winter markets like edible hand warmers. People pop them into their mouths like candy, savouring the soft, nutty texture and whisper of sweetness. This is snack food that requires minimal processing and maximum patience. The vendors roast them over open flame, carefully turning each one with long iron tongs. You crunch into one. Perfect. Children gather around a nearby cart selling frumenty balls. If that sounds like something you'd give to a livestock animal, you're not far off. Frumenty was a kind of wheat porridge, often mixed with egg yolks, saffron, and sometimes dried fruit when balled up and left to cool. It became a primitive dessert you could carry in your pocket. These particular ones are squishy and vaguely golden. You try one. It tastes like cinnamon glue. But hey, it's better than boiled bark. Not everyone could afford dessert, though. Most peasants relied on nature's candyberries, windfall apples, and occasionally honeycomb if they were lucky or brave enough to poke a hive. The notion of junk food was as much about access as it was about taste. Rich folks could afford spices. Everyone else hoped their food didn't taste like the cellar it came from. A small boy offers you a bite of something sticky on a flat rock. You take it. It's a leech, not the parasite, thankfully, but a medieval jelly candy made from boiled milk, sugar and rosewater, sometimes cut into cubes and dusted with crushed almond. This one is soft and fragrant, with the texture of toothpaste and a floral aftertaste that lingers. You try not to think about how it was made or how old it might be, but it's not bad. One particularly charming treat on display is marchpane, a precursor to modern marzipan. It's a sugary almond paste, moulded into flowers, birds, or little castles. The one in front of you is shaped like a pig and painted with vegetable dye. The noble class adored these often more for decoration than digestion. You nibble the ear off. It's sweet, oily, and sticks to your molars. You love it. But the standout snack of the evening is something called a spiced wafer, popular at fairs and feast days. It's a thin, brittle cookie made from flour, honey, and spices like ginger, cinnamon, or black pepper. Yes, pepper. Medieval desserts didn't always draw a clean line between sweet and savoury. You break one in half, crumbly, aromatic, and a little sharp. The black pepper hits your tongue like a surprise party. You're awake now. Curiously, some of the earliest gingerbread traces its roots to these spiced wafers, though less molasses and more molars, if we're being honest. Recipes varied wildly. Sometimes breadcrumbs replaced flour. Sometimes they added wine. Sometimes, for no apparent reason, they threw in boiled carrots. Historians still argue whether these odd combinations were traditional or just desperate improvisations. As you continue your slow meander, your hands sticky with residue and your pouch of coin significantly lighter, you reflect on the wild creativity it must have taken to call some of these things treats. But when your meals were mostly thin soup and barley mash, even something vaguely sweet, no matter how crumbly or suspicious, felt like celebration. One last stand offers hazelnut clusters. They're just cracked nuts rolled in leftover honey and a bit of achies, ash for preservation, and a touch of bitterness. You take a bite. Crunchy, sweet, smoky. Kind of good, actually. Like trail mix. If trail mix were invented by a hungry pyromaniac. The sky is growing darker. Torches flicker in the wind, and the market begins to quiet. Your stomach is full, your jaw sore from chewing medieval mystery textures, and your pockets are almost empty. But you've sampled the highs and lows of the medieval sweet tooth, and somehow, despite the odds, you're still standing. The air gets a little heavier now, with a rich, buttery smell that cuts through the earthy fog of damp straw and animal sweat. Your nose twitches. Somewhere nearby, someone's frying something that may not be entirely legal by modern health standards, but it smells divine. You round a crooked wooden post and find the source. A battered pan sizzling over coals, a half-melted chunk of cheese blistering in the centre like it's auditioning for a crime scene photo. Fried cheese. You didn't know they did that back then, did you? But oh yes, they did, and how. The vendor, a stout woman with arms that could churn butter by glaring at it, jabs a stick under the lump and flips it expertly. The bottom's golden, the edges crisp, the middle soft enough to ooze slightly. She sprinkles something on it. Crushed herbs? Ash? You don't ask. You just hold out your hand, like the sleep-deprived snack zombie you've become. The taste? Salty, earthy, hints of goat, barn, and maybe the faint memory of grass. But it's warm, rich, and filling. Cheese wasn't an everyday food for everyone, but it was absolutely present in medieval diet, especially among monks, farmers, and anyone with access to milk that had no better use. Cheese that had gone too soft to slice? You fried it. Cheese that had gone too hard to chew? You grated it. And cheese that smelled like the devil's foot? You pretended it didn't. Monks, in particular, were the cheese kings. Many of the techniques used to craft fancy modern wheels started in abbeys, where brothers in itchy robes experimented with rennet and mould in between prayers. There's even debate among historians as to whether certain monastic cheeses were intentionally fermented or just neglected for spiritual reasons. Either way, the results were edible-ish. You spot a small boy snacking on a curious square wrapped in cloth. It's called curd cake, essentially curdled milk, pressed into shape and flavoured with herbs or honey, a peasant's protein bar. You try one. It's chalky but strangely comforting, like a whisper of cottage cheese and regret. Right beside the cheese stand is a little tray of onion fritters. These are exactly what they sound like. Chopped onions bound with flour and water, fried in animal fat until brown and vaguely circular. Not every peasant could afford onions in bulk, but when they could, this was the outcome. You take one. Crunchy edges, soft middle. It tastes like old rings and dreams. The line between food and junk food wasn't clear-cut. If it filled you up fast, tasted strong, and didn't require cutlery, it counted. Fried cheese and onion fritters were rare treats, often reserved for fairs or end-of-harvest celebrations. But sometimes vendors made them in small batches to lure workers into spending coin. There were no menus, no calorie counts, just smell and hope. Across the square, you're drawn to another pan sizzling over an open fire. This one holds what looks like pancakes? Sort of. They're called griddle cakes. made from leftover grain, eggs, and sometimes dried fruit. A few have been charred to oblivion. One is still raw in the center. You buy the one in between. The vendor hands it to you on a wooden plank and you take a bite. Hot, doughy, a little smoky. There's a hint of sweetness, maybe from raisins or overripe apples. You chew thoughtfully. A drizzle of honey would make this divine. But you're not royalty, so you settle for licking the plank. Now and then, a passing merchant offers something unexpected: imported cheese wrapped in cloth, crumbly and pungent, smuggled in from Italy possibly, or just aged in a Frenchman's sock drawer. You can't be sure. You sample a piece. It burns your throat a little. That's how you know it's fancy. The local cheese scene, by contrast, was more rustic. Think hard wheels, simple soft rounds, and weird goat crumbles that changed flavour by the hour. In fact, some peasants got so good at making their own cheese that small-scale cheese economies popped up trading wedges for firewood or fish or the promise of a future chicken. Some historians still argue whether cheese was a peasant staple or a luxury item in disguise. The answer is yes. A cart trundles past with wheels wobbling and a donkey barely pretending to cooperate. The man driving it yells, "Hot milk pies, fresh curd bundles," and everyone pretends to not hear him, because we all know those are yesterday's leftovers reheated with hope and lard. You try one anyway. It's fine. The crust is chewy. The filling is warmish. Somewhere in it is a spice you can't identify. Possibly joy. Possibly dust. At a nearby communal table, really just a plank of wood balanced between two barrels, you sit beside a grizzled man with 4 teeth and a generous beard. He offers you something wrapped in cabbage leaf. You accept, naturally. Inside is a mashed root and cheese mix, rolled and fried. It's like the medieval cousin of a pierogi, only heavier and more suspicious. You chew slowly, nodding. He nods back. No words needed. There's a fringe theory floating among culinary historians that says many of these snack foods were invented not out of hunger, but boredom. When you're stuck in a repetitive diet of mush and grain, even a fried curd with a hint of thyme feels like rebellion. A dog barks in the distance. Someone drops a pot. The torchlight flickers. Your belly is now coated in a vague layer of cheese, onions, and lard-based optimism. It's warm inside. A little too warm. Time to move again. You leave the table behind and wander toward the next tempting scent. But a small part of you will miss the fried cheese, the way it clung to your teeth, the way it almost tasted like comfort. It wasn't junk food in the modern sense, but in a world without sugar-glazed donuts or vending machines, it was close enough. And for a moment, in the glow of firelight and grease, it was perfect. You step away from the warm comfort of cheese and grease, only to be pulled into a very different kind of culinary chaos, the medieval tavern. You push through a rickety door, ducking slightly to avoid the beam that's nearly decapitated countless inebriated patrons before you. Inside, it's loud laughter, slurred shouting, someone attempting to play a lute with 2 strings and no rhythm. The air is thick with smoke, sweat and ale, and somewhere under all that, food. Sort of. A serving girl weaves between wobbly tables with sloshing tankards and chipped wooden bowls. You snag a seat and one of those bowls lands in front of you with a dull thud. Pottage. Again. But this one's different. More oily. Less vegetable. It looks like someone tried to turn soup into stew and gave up halfway. A slab of crusty bread comes with it, so tough it could double as a medieval doorstop. You dip the bread into the sludge and give it a go. The flavour is not bad. Salty, warm, and vaguely meaty, if you squint your tongue. Sloppy pottage was a tavern, favourite cheap to make, forgiving of mystery ingredients, and excellent at soaking up alcohol. It was basically the medieval version of bar nachos. Everyone ate it, and nobody asked what was in it. At the next table over, a man is wolfing down a thing that looks like it once dreamed of being a meat pie. The crust is soggy. The filling is a greyish mush. You ask what it is. He grins and says, "Rat maybe." You both laugh, a little too long. It's unclear whether he's joking. Public pubs weren't just watering holes. They were social hubs, roadside rest stops, political centres, and rumour mills. And while you wouldn't exactly call what they served junk food, it ticked all the boxes, fast-ish, greasy, and consumed with reckless joy. You order another bowl of pottage. It arrives warmer this time. That's a win. A few other snack items circulate around the room. One man has what looks like a fried turnip. Another gnaws on a roasted marrow bone like a dog with a chew toy. A group in the corner is sharing something wrapped in cabbage again. You're starting to think cabbage was medieval aluminum foil. A serving boy offers you a small wooden dish of dried peas, salted and roasted. You pop a few into your mouth. Crunchy, a little earthy, not unpleasant. You're told they're tavern nuts, though there's not a nut in sight. They're just easy to make, store well, and pair nicely with a mug of whatever vaguely alcoholic liquid is currently making your fingers go numb. Ah, yes ale. You can't talk about medieval tavern fare without bringing up the drink of choice. Beer back then wasn't your crisp, filtered bottle of refreshment. It was cloudy, warm, and often spiced with herbs or roots depending on what was growing in the nearby ditch. But it was safer than water, and it didn't taste too much like sadness if you drank it fast. You take a sip from a shared jug. It tastes like wet bread, with hints of pine and a surprise kick of something bitter. Hops? Maybe. Or just week-old dandelion tea. Historians still argue whether early tavern beers were purposefully flavoured, or just consistently contaminated. Either way, people drank gallons of it, even kids. A scruffy man beside you offers a bite of something he calls pork shavings. It's just thin slices of cured pork, dried until leathery, and then pan-seared with mustard seed. You chew slowly, salty, sharp, a little burnt. He grins and says, "That's the good part." You believe him. You kind of have to. There's also a small wooden plate of what the locals call scraps. Just that fried crumbs, hardened bits of dough, and fat scrapings collected from the tavern hearth. They're crunchy, greasy, and dangerously addictive. Like medieval potato chips, if the potatoes were replaced by random hope. You start to notice something else. No one eats alone. Even the guy muttering into his drink shares a bite here and there. Food in taverns wasn't just sustenance, it was glue. It held communities together. Celebrations, arguments, bets, and songs all started over bowls of this strange slop. And there were songs, too. Loud, off-key, occasionally obscene, but deeply heartfelt. One group starts a chant about the cow who brewed better beer than a priest, and the room howls with laughter. You hum along. You don't know the words, but the tune is catchy, and the ale's starting to make sense. A strange item arrives on a trayer. Small lump of baked dough, filled with something. You break it open. It's a meat and egg mix with spices. Sort of a proto-Scotch egg? Kind of. The center is soft and savory. The crust is chewy. It's surprisingly good. This one's a bit of a mystery in terms of historical accuracy, but scholars have found references to similar handheld meat pastries. Some even theorize traveling soldiers or pilgrims may have carried such items, made in bulk and eaten cold. Another oddity makes the rounds. A slab of toasted bread topped with garlic paste and mashed beans. A peasant bruschetta, if you will. Not fancy, but filling, and garlicky enough to clear a stable. You try it. It sticks to the roof of your mouth like ambition, but you'd eat it again. The tavern's growing louder. Someone's dancing. Someone else is asleep in a pile of firewood. You lean back on your stool, stomach full, head buzzing. You've eaten like a medieval commoner, on a payday's loppily, joyfully, and with absolutely no sense of portion control. Before you go, one more curiosity, a round of tavern toffee, which is really just boiled honey cooled on stone and cracked into shards. It's sharp, sticky, and liable to steal a tooth or two, but it ends your meal on a sweet note. You stagger out into the cool night, belly full, head foggy, and fingers sticky with residual grease and sugar. The stars blur slightly above you, and for a moment, you swear you hear that cow beer song again, drifting through the thatch and smoke. The sun's dipped lower, casting the village in a slow, flickering amber that makes the cobbles look almost poetic. Almost. Your feet are sore, your gut is still doing cheese-related math, but you follow a trail of briny air to something entirely different. The bells have rung, and it's Friday, or at least a fast day of some kind, and that means meat is banned. So the people turn to fish. Lots of fish. Fish in ways that really shouldn't work, but sort of do. You round a corner and step into a fishmonger's alley, half covered in damp linen, and there it is, the unmistakable scent of dried herring, eel guts, and yesterday's tide. Welcome to medieval seafood street snacks. The first thing you try is handed to you on a sharpened stick. It's a fried eel fritter, curled like a dark, greasy question mark. You take a bite. It's crispy on the outside, gelatinous on the inside, and tastes like it lived a long, stressful life. And somehow, it's not bad. Salty, rich, and just chewy enough to feel like real food. Eel was a medieval superstar plentiful, easy to catch, and technically allowed during fasting days. Monasteries even raised them in special ponds. Some peasants believed eels were halfway between fish and serpent, which made eating them feel edgy in a delightfully heretical sort of way. Historians still argue whether eel was considered peasant food or a luxury, since both monks and nobles seemed equally obsessed. Next up is whitebait, tiny fish, fried whole and popped into the mouth by the handful. Bones? There. Heads? Yep. Flavoured with what might be vinegar or might just be slightly sour rainwater. Either way, it's crunchy and vaguely refreshing after the heavy tavern fare. A sort of medieval fish chip. You down 3 before you start asking questions. The vendor offers you a bundle wrapped in leaves. Inside, pickled mussels, briny, rubbery, with a bit of a zing from herbs or something that could very well be mould. You pop one into your mouth. It bites back. You nod politely, suppressing a gag, and keep chewing like a champion. But not all fish snacks were fear-inducing. Some were downright clever. Dried cod, what they called stockfish, was pounded into flakes, mixed with oil and spices, and shaped into little patties. It rehydrated in your mouth as you chewed, slowly revealing its flavour. You try one. It's like fish jerky, if jerky were made from old parchment. Still, not bad with ale. The whole idea of junk food changes when you're not allowed to eat meat for a third of the year. Fish-based snacks kept people going. They were portable, lasted a while, and you could cook them in a dozen questionable ways. And when you ran out of fish, you got creative. Enter almond cheese. On strict fast days, even dairy was off the table, so cooks made fake cheese out of ground almonds and vinegar. Was it tasty? Was it cheese-like? In the way a rubber duck is boat-like, yes. You take a nibble. It's grainy, tangy, and leaves your tongue confused, but you finish it anyway. A girl passes by with a basket of what look like hand pies. She sells you one for a copper and tells you it's fish and herbs. Inside, mashed fish, onions, leeks, and something peppery. The crust is tough, but the filling is surprisingly good. You chew thoughtfully. Maybe you're becoming a fish person. There's a heated debate happening near the church wall too. Older men are arguing about whether whales counted as fish. One says yes, and therefore they were fair game on fast days. The other insists they're beasts of the sea and should be off limits. Historians still argue the same thing. The church flip-flopped so many times that entire fishing economies trembled with every decision. One bishop even declared beavers were fish, due to their aquatic nature. This led to an unexpected boom in beaver tail stew. A boy hands you something truly strange. A mock sausage made from mashed peas, dried fish flakes, and fermented oat paste. It's been shaped into a sausage form and lightly smoked over seaweed. You bite in. It crumbles. It's not entirely pleasant, but oddly umami. You keep eating it, mostly out of curiosity and confusion. The further you go, the more variations you see. Fish balls spiced with mustard seed, oyster pancakes, anchovy paste on stale rye. A man with a long beard roasts lamprey on a spiton, ancient, jawless fish, with a face only a desperate monk could love. You decline, gently. Some records show that fish consumption during Lent skyrocketed to nearly comical levels. Nobles imported exotic catches, sturgeon, salmon, even dolphin, while peasants pickled, smoked, and stewed whatever they could net. Fish days weren't about suffering. They were about substitution, reinvention, and a lot of guessing. One last snack before you move on. Soused herring. This one's served cold, soaked in vinegar and herbs, with a crust of salt that's probably older than the cook. It's slippery, pungent, and wakes you up in ways coffee never could. You grimace. Then you take another bite. It grows on you, like moss or guilt. As you leave the alley, you pass a group of children gnawing on dried fish skins like medieval jerky. They wave. You wave back. Your breath now smells like the bottom of a tide pool, but your heart is warm. Fasting days may have banned meat, but they gave rise to a whole genre of seafood snacks, bizarre, inventive, and occasionally delicious. And honestly, eel fritters might just be your new thing. You're back in the bustle now, the crowd's thinning just slightly as dusk deepens, but the snack game? Still strong. You turn down another crooked lane where the real street food lives, not the tavern bowls or fast-day fish, but the walk-and-chew goodies, the things vendors cook fast, wrap badly, and sell cheap. It's messy, oily, questionably legal and absolutely what you're craving. The first stall you pass is selling meat pies. Real meat? Probably not. You glance at the sign, just a drawing of a hoof and some vague smoke. A good start. The vendor grins and hands you one straight from the fire. The crust is golden, overworked, and already flaking. You bite in. The filling is hot. That's the best word for it. Maybe pork, maybe pigeon, definitely onion, and a spicy afterkick that hits the back of your throat like a whispered dare. In medieval markets, these pies were iconic. Small, portable, and shaped to fit right in your hand. They were the original convenience. Food cheap, salty, and stuffed with whatever didn't scream when cooked. Street sellers made a killing on market days, pushing carts full of them through crowds like pastry-peddling sharks. Meat pies were the medieval hot dog stand. And sometimes, you could even find sweet versions. Just a few stalls down, a tired-looking woman with soot on her apron waves you over and hands you something wrapped in cloth. Ginger and plum, she says. You open it. Inside, a dark dough, glistening with sugar and spice, crumbling around bits of preserved plum. You taste. It's rich, sticky, warm with cinnamon or maybe something pretending to be cinnamon. Real spices were expensive. Substitutes were common. Clove, long pepper, even powdered root bark. Historians still argue whether recipes from lower-class kitchens truly used imported spice, or just the best available local mimicry. Nearby, a vendor stirs a thick pot of something reddish-brown. He dips a ladle, pours it onto a flatbread, and rolls it quick as a wink. You ask. He shrugs. Spice, paste, and beans. You take a bite. Hot, savoury, and spicy sweet. Almost like a medieval taco, if tacos were made from lentils, peppercorn, and culinary ambition. And there's a strange sweetness drifting from a small stall to your right. You follow your nose to a boy selling candied root parsnip slices boiled in honey until translucent and chewy. They're sugary, slightly earthy, and somehow refreshing. He hands you a bundle wrapped in linen, tied with twine. You nibble one as you walk. Like a medieval fruit snack, but crunchier and with more fibre than you asked for. This kind of food wasn't just eaten in alleys. It showed up at festivals, fairs, holy days, basically anywhere people gathered in chaotic numbers. The more portable and fragrant, the better. You pass a tray of roasted spiced chickpeas, sold in cone-shaped parchment, and grab one. They crunch, pop, and leave a burn on your tongue. You smile. Perfect. Someone's roasting dough over a brazier, spinning it onto sticks and brushing it with honey and butter. The medieval version of a churro? Sort of. You take one. It's blistering hot, sweet, and goes straight to the pleasure center of your sleep-deprived brain. You pause mid-bite, letting the honey dribble a little down your wrist. Worth it. One lesser-known medieval delight. Dough bites stuffed with dried fruits and fried in animal fat. These little dumpling-esque treats go by different names depending on the region. Fritters, krapfen, or sometimes just that thing that made me full and regretful. You try one. It explodes a bit in your mouth. Raisins, fig paste, maybe a whisper of wine. It's wonderful and slightly alarming. Then there's the spice bread, made with coarse flour, honey, and as many exotic flavours as the seller could fake. You break off a corner. Dry, dense, but the flavour lingers. Clove, ginger, something floral. Some medieval cooks coloured their spice breads with beetroot or saffron to make them look richer than they were. Sometimes they added breadcrumbs instead of flour. Historians still argue whether this was a budget tactic or a genuine culinary tradition. You drift toward a woman selling almond cookies. They're dense, not too sweet, and flavoured with rosewater. The texture is chewy, almost gummy. She tells you they're from an old convent recipe, meant for nuns who wanted to eat without sin. You're not sure what that means, but you finish two anyway. Further on, a cart is selling sops, chunks of bread, dipped in syrup, vinegar, or spiced wine. They're soggy, cold, and surprisingly tasty. You try one with wine syrup and almost sigh out loud. like French toast's weird medieval uncle. Apparently, these were popular because they let stale bread feel fancy again. Waste not, snack more. A man with ink-stained fingers and a crooked cap waves you over next. He offers a palmful of something crunchy and oddly shaped. Fried peas, he says. You chew. Crunchy. A little smoky. Addictive. He tells you poets used to snack on them while writing. You believe it. They're definitely fuel for dramatic thoughts and digestive rumbling. The final surprise of the alley is a little wooden box filled with dried apple slices dusted in powdered mint. Not a pairing you expected. You bite one. Sweet. Cool. Strange. But it works. Fruit snacks weren't common, but when they showed up, they were something to talk about. This alley-loud, grimy fragrantis, the beating heart of medieval junk food. There's no cleanliness score, no uniform, and no labels. But it's full of joy, ingenuity, and just enough danger to keep things interesting. Everything's a little burnt, a little overspiced, and a lot beloved. You leave the street sticky-fingered, bread-crumbed, and blissfully full. You also leave with a final treat in your Paquita tiny cone of fried pastry filled with cheese and dried plums. A medieval dessert hot pocket. You're saving it for later, but you know you won't wait long. The village edges blur behind you as you follow a meandering path into the fields, where the rhythm of daily life slows. No roaring taverns, no smoky stalls, just open space, birdsong, and the distant sound of someone arguing with a goat. You're heading toward a peasant gatheringa, kind of rustic picnic. Not the kind with blankets and wine glasses. This is more whatever's edible in a basket on the ground. You find them seated under a crooked old tree, chatting, snacking, and swatting flies. Welcome to the world of rural feasting. At the center of the group sits a wide cloth spread with an assortment of strange and scrappy dishes. A wheel of coarse rye bread that looks like it could stop a sword. A slab of something that may have once been cheese. A few hand-sized pies, with suspicious steam wafting off them. It's not a gourmet spread, but there's laughter, and everyone's sharing. You're handed a slice of herb cake. Don't get too excited. It's really just mashed lentils mixed with dried nettle and wild garlic, shaped into a patty and baked on a stone. You chew slowly. It's earthy, chewy, and not quite offensive. This is the heart of peasant eating. Take what you have, mash it together, hope for the best. There's a shallow wooden bowl being passed around, filled with something called bean mash. It's pale, lumpy, and flavored with oil and wild onion. The person next to you adds a drizzle of vinegar and a sprinkle of powdered mustard root something for kick. You dip a crust of bread in and give it a try. Not bad. Sort of like hummus. If hummus was made by a barefoot guy with a shovel and a prayer. Many peasants grew their own food or foraged. Snacks came from necessity, not recipe scrolls. You glance at a dish of what look like pickled flower buds. Someone calls them cowslip capers. They're briny, sour, and surprisingly crunchy. You pop a few like chips. It's easy to imagine a whole medieval Netflix binge fueled on these. If only television and indoor plumbing had been invented. One of the women is unwrapping a surprise from a linen pouch. A whole tansy pudding. Now don't let the name fool you, it's not dessert. It's eggs mixed with bitter herbs like tansy, parsley and thyme, cooked until firm, then sliced like a loaf. It was often eaten during Lent, or to cleanse the humours. Historians still argue whether it was meant to be medicinal, or just an excuse to use eggs before they went bad. You get a slice. It's dense and herbal. The texture's somewhere between quiche and regret, but you chew and nod politely. It's not bad, just specific. Then comes the surprise pie. You crack it open. Inside, what appears to be boiled eggs, root vegetables, and what might be salted mutton, or perhaps rabbit. The flavour is uneven, the texture varies by bite, and the crust is half burnt. Still, it's filling, and someone proudly announces they made it with lard. They traded for a rooster. A solid investment, you think. Here's the truth about peasant picnics: they weren't always planned. Sometimes they just happened. A successful planting season, a baby born healthy, or a visit from relatives. Any excuse to gather and eat. Dishes were simple, ingredients seasonal, and everything was shared. Leftovers? If you had any, they were either dried, pickled, or turned into the next day's stew. You try a hand pie filled with mashed turnip and pepper. It's weirdly spicy. The woman who made it grins. "Use too much root," she says. Now it fights back. You nod, eyes watering. Excellent. A young boy offers you a roasted onion, skin still blackened from fire. You peel it carefully and take a bite. Sweet, smoky, soft, like caramel, but also slightly medicinal. People forget that even common vegetables can taste magical with enough flame and desperation. One older man pulls out a jar filled with what looks like dark jelly. He calls it beet conserve. You try a smear on a rough oat biscuit. It's tangy and sweet, somewhere between jam and vinegar. Not quite candy, but definitely a treat. Preserving root vegetables like this wasn't common, but clever peasants with access to sweeteners sometimes created these odd hybrids. The result? A medieval jam session with fewer guitars, more fibre. Another rare snack shows up, Candid Angelica. Yes, the plant. They boil it in honey until the stalks go soft and syrupy. It's sweet with a bitter edge, kind of like celery went to finishing school. A fringe recipe for sure, probably passed down from someone's great-grandmother's herbal grimoire. You chew and wonder if you're also being healed somehow. Nearby, a family unwraps a loaf of barley bread. It's dry, tough, and slightly green. Mold? No mint leaves, baked in for freshness. A smart touch. You tear a piece and chew slowly. It's chewy in the jaw-aching way, but not unpleasant. Some peasants soaked this kind of bread in ale or broth to soften it, turning it into a sort of snack stew. A fun detail you didn't expect. Someone brought plum pit tea, basically hot water poured over cracked stone fruit pits. Bitter, nutty, and strangely floral. You sip. It tastes faintly of almonds and questionable decision-making. Still, it's warm, and you kind of like it. As the meal winds down, someone passes around dried mushroom chips, just thin sliced fungus, dried near the hearth until brittle, earthy, crunchy, and deeply fungal. You eat them slowly, half enjoying the taste, half wondering which ones might be hallucinogenic. Don't worry, they're probably fine. The sun is setting fully now, and the group begins to sing. Low, slow songs about crops and cows and life moving forward one tired footstep at a time. You lie back on the grass, stomach comfortably full of odd textures, bitter herbs, and one or two possibly magical plants. The stars begin to peek out, and you close your eyes for just a second. Peasant life was hard, yes, but moments like this under a sky big enough to forget your troubles, chewing flour-stuffed bread and listening to old songs were the true sweetness in a world of salt and smoke. You wake with a small start, just a moment, just a blink, and find the sky fully dark, dotted with stars so clear it almost feels like cheating. The peasant picnic has wound down, baskets packed, songs fading, but your night's journey isn't over. In the distance, where torchlight flickers behind high stone walls, something glitters. A castle. Time to explore how the other half snacks. You tread a path uphill, your steps crunching softly. The air is cooler here, cleaner, like even the wind pays rent. By the time you reach the gates, a soft harp tune is drifting from the great hall. You slip in through a side courtyard, invisible to most, and soon find yourself beneath vaulted ceilings and beside tables groaning under weighty platters. Welcome to the royal nibble zone where indulgence meets architectural overcompensation. The first thing you spot is a bowl of candied almonds glazed in honey and dusted with what might be cinnamon or powdered sugar. They're shiny, neat, uniform. You pop one into your mouth. Sweet, crunchy, a little sticky, definitely made in a kitchen where someone wore shoes. The nobles loved their comfits, as they called them. Tiny sugar-coated seeds and nuts meant to freshen the breath and flaunt wealth in a single bite. Some even had silver leaf on them, because of course they did. Nearby, a servant carries a platter of what looks like fruit, but it's glowing faintly in the torchlight. Gold? You blink. It is gilded. Literally. A pear brushed with edible gold leaf, purely for show. You pick it up, gently. The fruit is ripe, juicy, and expensive enough to fund a village. You nibble. It tastes like pear. Just regular, delicious pear. The gold does nothing except announce, "Look at me. I'm extra." That's the thing about noble snacking, half the appeal was visual. Banquet tables were theatre. Snacks came shaped like swans, castles, unicorns. Not because they were easier to eat, but because they were harder to ignore. In fact, some sugar sculptures weren't eaten at all. They were called subtleties, designed to impress, confuse, or make political statements. One famously depicted a monk and a nun kissing, then melting into a tree. Dessert or drama? You decide. A nearby table holds tiny pies, each no bigger than your palm, filled with minced quail, raisins, and spices. The crust is buttery and perfect. You take a bite. The flavor is rich and layered, with hints of clove and something vaguely citrus. Historians still argue whether citrus was used this early in common dishes, but in noble circles, anything imported and fragile was on the table. Next, a woman in velvet gloves hands you what looks like a wafer-thin pastry, filled with pear paste and cheese. Sweet, sharp, tangy, odd, but not unpleasant. These kinds of flavor combinations were common in noble kitchens, where the contrast between sugar and vinegar, fruit and fat, was considered sophisticated. You chew slowly, savoring the taste and the idea that no one has thrown you out yet. There's a bowl of sugared rose petals next. Delicate, crisp, and shockingly tasty. The nobles loved edible flowers, using them to perfume syrups, sweeten wines, and occasionally confuse guests into thinking they were eating dessert, when really it was just botanically enhanced boredom. Then you spot something wild. A sugar sculpture shaped like a castle with battlements made of nougat and banners made of spun sugar. You stare at it, blinking slowly. That's not food, it's edible architecture. And yes, someone will bite into it later to show they can. Welcome to the 1% of the 1300s. You find a quiet corner where a tray of soft cakes rests, each one topped with a preserved cherry. They call them marchpane cakes, basically mini almond pastries layered with sugar and crushed nuts. You bite into one. It crumbles softly, the cherry sweet and sharp. You sigh. Nobles had the almond hookup thanks to trade routes, and their cooks knew how to stretch every gram of it into edible status symbols. Interestingly, while peasants were stretching turnips into stew, the upper classes were importing things like sugar loaf, ginger, saffron, and dried dates. Sometimes they'd even pretend their meals were humbly on purpose, just to show they had a choice. You'd see nobles fasting on elaborate seafood feasts, or humbly nibbling on saffron rice moulded into the shape of a chalice. Very grounded. A servant offers you a glass of spiced wine. It's warm, fragrant, and probably more expensive than your theoretical house. You sip. It's infused with cloves, nutmeg, and a sweet note that might be honey. This was called hippocras, a medieval mulled wine, often served at the end of noble meals. It was said to aid digestion, though it mostly helped guests stumble home feeling fancy. By now, you've eaten a series of impossibly delicate, wildly impractical, and deeply delicious things. But then comes the pièce de résistance, a small, gleaming jelly. Not your wobbly cafeteria cube, but an artfully moulded gelatin made from clarified broth, wine, and fruit juice. It's shaped like a rose and wiggles ominously on its plate. You take a bite. Sweet, savoury, slightly spiced, and intensely weird. A miracle of culinary science and gelatinous nerve. There's one last treat before you make your graceful exit. A sugar plate. Literally hardened sugar shaped like a plate, painted with edible dyes. Some nobles didn't eat them, just kept them as decorations or let their kids lick them. You take a corner and nibble. Pure sugar. Hard as sin. Tastes like dentist bills. As you drift back through the castle hall, you hear lute music picking up, and nobles laughing softly over glasses of hippocras. The table still glitters. The air smells of rosewater and roasted almond. You slip away, belly full, mind dazzled, and completely aware that this kind of snacking wasn't made to last. It was meant to be remembered. And just as you cross the courtyard back into the cool night, you pass a tired-looking scullery boy holding a slice of day-old pie in his bare hand. He winks at you. "This one's better cold," he says, and takes a bite. Maybe he's right. You leave the castle behind, its golden glow shrinking into the horizon, and your feet find the dirt path again. But this time, you're heading somewhere strangerless, elegant, more experimental, because it's not just solid food that kept medieval mouths happy. No, there were drinks too. Drinks that fermented, fizzed, smoked, and occasionally fought back. Tonight, you're going to sip your way through some of the most bizarre medieval beverages ever concocted. You begin in a tiny village alehouse. Just one room with a thatched roof and a door that sticks. Inside, it's warm and smells like damp straw, wet wool, and very old apples. The first thing you're handed is a clay cup of what the locals call small ale. It's weak, beer barely alcoholic, but considered safer than water. Everyone drinks it, even children. You take a sip. It's cloudy, sour, and tastes faintly like cereal left too long in milk, but it's drinkable. Just. Small ale wasn't made for pleasure. It was fuel hydrating, mildly calming, and far less likely to kill you than river water. Most households brewed their own. And yes, women ran that world. Alewives with big cauldrons and bigger attitudes ruled their neighbourhoods one frothy jug at a time. A boy at the next table offers you a sip of something darker. Beet beer, he says. You hesitate, then sip. It's earthy. Very earthy. Like drinking a garden. There's a fizz on your tongue, though, and a sweetness that makes it oddly addictive. Beet-based brews were real especially in Northern Europe, where grapes were a fantasy, and barley didn't always thrive. People fermented whatever grew, and hoped for the best. And what about turnip wine? Yes, it was a thing. You get a cup thicker than you'd hoped, paler than you'd like. The smell alone nearly stops you, but you sip, surprisingly smooth. Slightly peppery, weirdly warm. You blink. That's not bad. Historians still argue whether root-based wines were widespread, or just the product of very bored farmers with too much time and too many vegetables. You wander out again, past the alehouse and into the fields where travelling traders sometimes set up camp. One has a boiling cauldron of mead-honey wine. He ladles you a bit. It's golden, fragrant, and actually delicious. Sweet, strong, with the barest burn. Mead was probably the closest thing medieval people had to what you'd call a cocktail. Fancy, but still rustic. Vikings loved it. Monks perfected it. Poets got sappy on it. A woman nearby offers you a cup of posset. You take it cautiously. This one's warm milk curdled with ale or wine, spiced with nutmeg or ginger, and thick as pudding. It was meant to be both medicinal and comforting. You sip. It's chunky, and yet oddly cozy. Like sleepy time tea, if it were lumpy and alcoholic. People drank posset before bed, during illness, or just to flex their spice budget. Then comes wassail, a festive punch of cider, ale, spices, sugar, and roasted apples. You take a mug. The warmth hits your nose before your tongue. The taste is rich, fruity, complex. It's like holiday cheer got into a bar fight and won. This was drunk during winter feasts, when people would go house to house singing and drinking in exchange for food or more booze. Kind of like caroling, if caroling ended with public vomiting and a goat loose in your kitchen. Not all drinks were hot or friendly. One man, clearly proud of his concoction, offers you a shot of wormwood bitters. It's sharp, medicinal, and makes your ears tingle. Some believed these herbal drinks balanced your humours, those mysterious bodily fluids that medieval doctors blamed for everything from headaches to heartbreak. In fact, the entire drinking culture was soaked in medicine. Herbal tonics made from sage, thyme or nettle, shrubs crafted from fruit and vinegar. Even rainwater infused with crushed pearls, yes, really believed to cure melancholy. You don't try that one. Too fancy. At one stall, a monk-like man offers herb wine. It's made with mint, rosemary, and something he won't name. You sip. It's cold, clear, and tastes like someone turned a garden into regret. You nod politely. He bows. You both pretend it was a pleasant exchange. Then comes a strange moment. Someone offers you a thick, dark drink that smells like bread. It's kvass low-alcohol Slavic beverage, made from fermented rye bread. You sip. It's sour, slightly fizzy, and somehow comforting, like soda made by your great-great-grandmother's ghost. A curious fringe item appears next. Rose vinegar. It's water steeped with rose petals and vinegar, sometimes sweetened with honey, used for both refreshment and skincare. You dab some on your lips. It tastes like perfume and salad dressing had a confusing child. Historians still argue whether this was meant for sipping or splashing. You're getting a little dizzy. Understandable. You've just tasted the medieval version of a cocktail flight curated by chaos. But it's not all strange. Some of these drinks are genuinely comforting, especially the mead and wassail. Others are, let's say, educational. There's one last cup you're offered before calling it a night. It's mulled cider apple juice with cloves, cinnamon, and a hint of dried orange peel. It smells like winter evenings and candlelight. You sip slowly. This one feels like a hug. You sit under a tree, legs stretched, warm cup in hand, and let your head lean back. The stars spin slowly above you. The village is quiet. Your stomach is a melting pot of turnip wine, honey, vinegar, and something suspiciously herbal. But you feel good, calm, a little wobbly, like the world is blurry in the best way. In the end, medieval beverages weren't just liquid snacks. They were stories, remedies, rituals. Sometimes they healed, sometimes they horrified, and sometimes they hit exactly right. The road feels softer beneath your feet now, as if even the dirt has mellowed out. Your breath steams slightly in the cool night air, and a few stray fireflies flicker lazily beside you. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, marking the end of the day, but for you, it's time to head towards something far more exciting than bedtime. It's feast day, carnival time, festival season. Call it what you like, but the food? The food is loud, greasy, and not even pretending to be good for you. It's medieval junk food, in its most chaotic, unhinged form. You reach a fairground already pulsing with activity. Coloured banners flap in the wind, jugglers stumble past, fire dancers twirl, like they've never considered the concept of safety, and the cento, the centis, everything you love and fear, sugar, smoke, meat, ash, dough, and something suspiciously like burning wool. Perfect. First up, fried pastries. You head straight for the stall with the biggest crowd, where a woman is flipping lumps of dough into hot lard with the speed of someone who's been doing this since birth. They call them crisples, or fry cakes, small discs of wheat dough, sometimes filled with fruit paste, sometimes just sprinkled with sugar. She hands you one fresh from the oil, golden and steaming. You bite in. It crackles. The inside is chewy, warm, and just sweet enough. You're in love. Carnival food wasn't subtle. It was indulgence in edible form, meant to counterbalance all those dreary days of fasting and penitence. When you had a feast day on the calendar, you prepared your stomach and your soul. Nearby, a cart is serving lardy cakes. Yes, they are exactly what they sound like to. Slathered with lard, sugar, dried fruit and spices, then baked until dense and sticky. You grab one. It weighs as much as a toddler. The taste? Greasy, sweet, and slightly overwhelming, like your arteries sent a polite complaint to your brain, and yet, you take another bite. Worth it. Somewhere behind you, a man yells about cheese fritters. You turn on instinct. He's got a pot of bubbling oil, and he's dropping dollops of cheesy batter in by the handful. These little nuggets of joy come out crispy, golden, and dangerously hot. You pop one in your mouth too soon and immediately regret it. Then you take another, slower bite. Perfection. One lesser-known treat you try is pancake rolls, thin crepes filled with chopped nuts and honey, rolled tightly and fried again for good measure. They're tooth-achingly sweet and melt into goo the moment you bite in. Apparently, these were popular at Shrovetide festivals, eaten in celebration before Lent slammed the door on your fun. A man walks by tossing puffed grains into the air. Puffed what? You're not sure. Barley, maybe? Some sort of proto-popcorn. They're roasted until they pop slightly, then tossed in honey or salt and handed out in cones. You catch a few and chew, crunchy, a bit burnt, and wildly satisfying. Then there are the sops in wine, chunks of stale bread, soaked in spiced wine, and served like little boozy snacks. Some people eat them with a spoon, others just slurp them straight from a bowl. You're handed one in a thick cup. It's soggy, strong, and feels like you're drinking history through a wet sponge. Somehow, you like it. Feast day food didn't just stay on plates. Sometimes it rained from the sky, literally. Certain noble-sponsored festivals included tossing sweetmeats from balconies into the crowd. Sugared nuts, fruit tarts, bits of gilded shortbread. A dangerous game, honestly. You duck as a candied date sails past your head. You make your way to a line of roasting spits, where pigs, birds, and possibly a peacock are slowly turning. The scent is unbelievable, but you're here for the snacks, not the showstoppers. You zero in on a tray of fat cakes, balls of animal fat mixed with flour, herbs, and maybe chopped nuts, then fried until golden. You hesitate. You try one. It's intense, salty, rich, and unlike anything you'd find on a modern menu. Not exactly refreshing, but deeply filling. One man is selling mock fruit, sugar sculptures shaped like apples, pears, and plums. You pick up a tiny marzipan peach, and take a bite. The sweetness hits first, followed by the almond, and then a wave of, wait, how did they make this with no electricity? Because the artistry here is ridiculous. Even peasants might get a small one on a special day, if their lord was feeling generous, or if they stole it. Hard to say. There's also a liquid lineup here, of course. A woman ladles out hot caudle, a thick, wine-based drink mixed with eggs, sugar, and spices, like alcoholic pudding in a mug. You sip it, and immediately feel both sleepy and oddly powerful. It's warm, weird, and definitely feast day material. Someone's selling herbal fritters, which sound healthy but aren't. Just chopped greens and dough fried in oil and served with vinegar sauce. You eat 3. They're bright, greasy, and vaguely medicinal. Probably cancel out the lard cake, right? Then you see the big attraction, the food parade. People dressed as walking pies, dancing eels, and human-shaped gingerbread march through the crowd, tossing bits of fried dough into cheering hands. A man dressed as a goose shouts something about spice and sin before hurling cinnamon bread at a delighted child. This is peak medieval. As fireworks, small, smoky, unpredictable, burst in the distance, you sit on a low stone wall, belly round and brain foggy. You nibble the corner of a fruit-stuffed fritter and let the chaos spin around you. Feast days were rare, sacred, wild, a break from the grinding ordinary. And the food? It was celebratory chaos, a declaration that, just for a moment, you could eat like tomorrow didn't exist. You lean back, watching fire trails arc across the sky. Somewhere, a man dressed as a cheese wheel is doing a jig. And honestly, that's exactly how tonight should end. It's well past midnight now. The music from the feast day fades behind you, replaced by the hush of sleeping animals and the occasional creak of wood settling in for the night. But don't think your snack journey is over yet. As you drift down a narrow, dimly lit alley behind the market square, a different kind of food world stirs quietly in the shadows. Welcome to the black market buffet, the underground scene of alley vendors and not quite legal delights. You're about to taste the medieval version of guilty pleasures, secrecy, and maybe just a pinch of food-related crime. The first stand you come across is hardly a stand at all, more like a blanket laid out in the corner beside a crooked fence. An old man with an eye patch, for fashion or necessity you'll never know, lifts a cloth to reveal a tray of dried dates, coated in something sticky and suspiciously dark. From the east, he whispers, though it's probably just yesterday's honey. You take one anyway. Chewy, sweet, a little gritty, probably smuggled, definitely delicious. Exotic foodstuffs were tightly regulated in many towns. Imports like sugar, cinnamon, or dried fruit were taxed heavily or forbidden outright for commoners, which of course meant backdoor deals and off-the-books sales flourished. Historians still argue whether these underground markets were widespread or just blown out of proportion by anxious town officials. Either way, they existed, and they had snacks. You're handed a slab of smoked cheese, neck soft, pungent, wrapped in waxy leaves. It reeks like old boots and ambition. You take a bite. It's rich, tangy, almost meaty. Too strong for some palates, but not yours. Cheese like this wasn't always allowed to be sold in markets due to spoilage risks or regional monopoly rules, so it showed up here, in back alleys and under tables. A woman nearby has a small brazier heating what looks like pale, battered cubes. Fish fritters, she mutters. Spiced. You bite in. Flaky, savoury, with a strange zing of pepper and clove. Not bad, definitely not legal. Fish was taxed differently on feast days, and selling cooked fish without a license could get you fined or worse, publicly shamed by the Fishmongers Guild. Further down, a boy sells fig syrup by the spoonful, thick, dark, and poured over coarse bread like some decadent drizzle. It's sweet, with a deep, fermented note. You ask where he got it. He says, a barrel fell off a cart. You do not ask follow-up questions. Then you see something truly suspect. Bread rolls dyed bright yellow. That's not saffron, you're told. That's powdered calendula. It fakes the look of luxury without the cost. People bought these fake saffron buns to feel fancy on a peasant's budget. It worked. You try one. Soft, floral, a little dry. But your eyes say feast, and that's what matters. One cart is wrapped in curtains. Behind them, a man slices what looks like sweetmeat sugar syrup cakes made with boiled fruit, nuts, and a touch of ginger. These kinds of treats were once reserved for noble banquets, but enterprising cooks found ways to make cheaper versions for anyone with coin and secrecy. You chew slowly, savoring the spice. A little crystallized, a little burned, and incredibly satisfying. There's even something called black bread, a rye loaf made with dark ale and a dash of molasses. It's dense, bitter, and lasts for weeks. The bitterness comes from burned barley and old yeast. Not everyone liked it, but those who did swore by it. And because it wasn't taxed like white bread, it found popularity among rebels, scholars, and people who just didn't trust flour anymore. You spot something wrapped in paper and tied with twine meatballs, someone whispers. Not the kind you're used to. These are made of ground offal, stale oats, and what tastes like strong mustard. You chew slowly. They're dense, chewy, heavily spiced, designed to mask the fact that you're eating a combination of 4 different animals and possibly a pigeon. Then comes the highlight. A seller pours you a cup of fennel cordial. It's strong, sweet, and burns slightly going down. The drink's banned during daylight hours due to its strength, and the fact that someone once lit a torch too close and set an entire booth on fire. You sip cautiously. Anise, mint, maybe something else entirely. Definitely too powerful for a church picnic. And in the far corner, nearly hidden by barrels, a baker pulls tiny rolls from a hidden oven. Ash buns, he says. Made with flour, lard and ashes from burned herbs. They were said to cure hangovers and restore the humours. You try one. Smoky, soft and oddly comforting. The kind of snack you eat when you've made several bad decisions but still believe in carbs. You finish your ash bun just as a bell rings softly in the distance. Some vendors pack up immediately. Others melt into the shadows. Alley food was delicious but dangerous. Not just because of health risks, but because guilds and councils didn't like untaxed sales. And no one wanted to anger the spice cartels. As you wander back toward the main road, your pockets feel lighter, your hands sticky, and your stomach humming with sweet, salty defiance. You've eaten things most nobles never dared. You've joined the secret society of medieval snack rebels. And honestly, that illegal fish fritter might have been the best thing you've eaten all night. The sky is lightening now, that soft, dusty lavender that only shows up in the hour before sunrise. You walk slowly along a quiet track outside the village wall, boots scuffing against frostbitten grass, your body heavier with every bite remembered. And still, one last layer of this strange medieval menu remains. Tonight, we end on the weirdest course of all. Food that wasn't quite what it seemed. Fake food. Dishonest dishes. The delicious deceptions of the Middle Ages. You spot a small bakery just beginning to stir, its shutters not yet fully open. An older man sits at the side entrance with a basket of rolls, steam rising faintly from within. But when you bite one, your mouth freezes mid-chew. Something's wrong. The crust is fine crispy, golden, but the inside, it's stale. 2, maybe 3 days old. Reheated and re-dyed with beet juice to make it look fresh. Ah, bread fraud. It was everywhere. Bakers were often fined or worse for disguising old loaves as new, adding chalk or powdered bone to stretch flour, or sprinkling flour on top to fake that fresh from the oven look. In some towns, bread inspectors roamed the markets sniffing for lies. Historians still argue whether these food crimes were driven by desperation or pure greed. The truth, like your roll, is dry and crumbly. Further on, you spot a stand labelled venison pies, but the vendor quickly pulls the sign down when he sees the local watch passing by. You catch the wink he gives the next customer. Venison? More likely goat, or old mutton, or, in some cases, no meat at all. Just flavoured oats and gravy to simulate the idea of meat. One clever trick was to soak grain in meat drippings to mimic the texture. It wasn't lying. Exactly it was. Imaginative labelling. You grab a meat pie. Inside, onions, turnips, and a whiff of something vaguely animal. The crust is excellent though, so you forgive it. Back in larger cities, entire industries popped up around food fakery. Dye was king. Dried peas were coloured yellow to look like more expensive lentils. Red wine was darkened with elderberries or even iron nails. Butter was stretched with mashed carrots. Fish was passed off as other fish. There were even references to mock eggs, tiny balls of spiced dough served in eggshells, so you never knew what you were cracking into. A small stand nearby is selling what looks like cheese, but you pick it up and it crumbles weirdly. It's cheese-like, but made from mashed beans, salt, and something sour, maybe vinegar or curdled milk. Lenten cheese, the woman explains. No dairy, but the bishop can't tell. You try it. It's tangy, strange, and oddly satisfying. The line between real and fake blurred a lot during fasting seasons, when people craved what they weren't allowed to eat. And with no refrigeration, the difference between cheese substitute and cheese accident was often spiritual. There's also the infamous sawdust sausage. You've heard whispers, but here it is. A street seller with a pot of steaming links, the sign proudly declaring, "All natural fillings," which is about as vague as it is unconvincing. You take one. The casing is tight. The bite is chewy. And yes, you feel the grit. Sawdust, breadcrumbs, maybe oat husk, mixed with lard and spices to bulk out whatever tiny scraps of meat were available. You stop chewing, then chew again. Because, actually, the seasoning's not bad. Fraud didn't stop at ingredients. Shapes were fair game too. There were pies made to look like birds disguised as fish, and puddings with fruit only on the top half to fake richness. One cook even made a roasted swan restitched into its own skin after cooking, feathers and all, just for show. Most of these tricks were reserved for royal or noble feasts, but the habit trickled down. Even the humblest cook knew how to make one apple look like three if you had enough butter and nerve. You spot another baked, good, perfect golden colour, lovely round shape. You break it open, hollow, just a puff of crust, no filling, a beggar's tart, deceptively promising, surprisingly common. One young vendor offers spiced puffs, tiny balls of fried dough. You try one. It tastes like cinnamon and something sharp. The sweetness masks the bland core. A smart move. Spice is often covered up less than fresh ingredients. Nutmeg for old eggs, clove for rank meat, sugar for absolutely everything. Some vendors weren't trying to lie, they were just playing the game. A strange game, where survival meant making the simplest things seem slightly extravagant. Where your bread was half bean flour, your pie crust was ash thickened, and your jelly wobbled thanks to a fish bladder. And then there's the drink table. A cup of red wine, actually mulberry juice with a dash of vinegar. Ale, watered down. The vendor shrugs. Tastes close enough, doesn't it? You sip. It does. Your standards, like everyone's, have softened with the hour. The final bite of the night is something truly absurd. A piece of meat cake layers of pastry, dried fruit and suet, shaped to look like a roast, served cold. You chew. It's rich, spicy, greasy, and very weird. A feast and a trick. That's medieval cuisine in a nutshell. As the sun crests the hills in the softest shade of gold, you stretch your legs, shoulders slack, and take one final look around. Empty stalls, faint smoke, crumbs in your sleeves. You've tasted the lies, the shortcuts, the clever fixes that kept bellies full and inspectors guessing. Not all junk food was honest, but it didn't have to be. It just had to get the job done. Because in the end, medieval food wasn't about perfection. It was about improvisation, illusion, survival, sometimes even joy. You chew the last of your hollow tart. It's not much, but it's enough. And now, it's morning. The golden light softens the crooked rooftops and washes the cobbled streets in a sleepy warmth. Birds begin to chirp just one or two, as if testing the silence. The stalls are empty now, their tables bare, the fire's gone cold. Even the alleyways, once alive with sizzling pans and whispered deals, are still. The village exhales. You sit quietly beneath a tree on the edge of the road, back against the bark, your breath steady, your belly still heavy with memoria sweet, strange and savoury. All around you, the world is waking up. But for now, you don't have to. You've travelled so far tonight across steaming kitchens and muddy markets, beneath castle arches and through ivy-covered fields. You've tasted history, not just in facts, but in crumbs and crusts and laughter and spice. You've chewed through centuries, one sleepy bite at a time, and now you can let it all settle. Whatever the day holds, you've made it to this quiet place. You're full, you're safe, and maybe just a little wiser than before, because even when the food was strange or fake or slightly illegal, it always told a story, one of creativity, resilience, and hungry joy. So now, let your eyes close just a little more. Let the world drift to softness, The warmth of the sun on your skin, the scent of hay and wood smoke still clinging faintly to the air, the last flicker of laughter from a feast you'll never forget. It all begins to blur. There's nothing else you need to do. No more footsteps to take. No more pies to taste. Good night.